So you finally figured it out. Selling options is about finding things with variance risk premium. Congratulations, first step is completed. And you might have actually got to the second step if you watched our last video, where one of the easiest ways to capture variance risk premium is just to be selling options on a basket of ETFs. Nice job. Now the third step, which is what we're going to talk about in this video, is how do you actually capture variance risk premium? In this video, we're going to talk about 3 different trade structures that you can use when you've identified ETFs that you want to sell options on that give you exposure to the variance risk premium in slightly different ways. But just so you know off the bat, the 3 we'll be talking about are a 30-day delta hedge straddle, a 30-day bull put spread, and a weekly delta 20 strangle. And so with that being said, let's jump into things. All right, so the first structure we're talking about is that short straddle, 30 days out. The reason I like this structure so much is because a 30-day window is right in that sweet spot where you're getting a lot of exposure to the variance risk premium because you do have that gamma exposure. But at the same time, 30 days is enough time for things to calm back down. So if you do get 1 or 2 days of movement, it's not the end of the world, as it might be with some of the shorter dated stuff. It's a really good starting point because you also need to delta hedge these positions, which helps you really develop a strong understanding of how to manage a short volatility position, which I think is especially good if you're relatively new to the space. This is also the structure that we use in our backtesting on the Predicting Alpha terminal. So if you do become a member and want to run our ETF strategy, this is a structure that makes sense to start with because it exactly replicates the results you see on the backtest. Hopping over to the computer for a second here, I'll just show you what it looks like for, let's say, DIA. Switch up the ticker here. Let's come down. Here's what the back test looks like. So this is the cumulative return for shorting 10,000 of notional at the money 30-day straddles with daily delta hedging. So this is selling every 30-day straddle that appears, which is not what I recommend you do, obviously. In reality, you're going to be doing 30 days and then rolling maybe, let's say, 10 DTE remaining, something like that. But generally, this shows you how when you're trading that 30-day window, you do get a really nice trend in your P&L. And that's exactly what we want exposure to in our portfolios. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this structure is that if you do trade it and you want to carry a hedge, you can structure it as an iron butterfly, where you go and you buy wings that are really far out of the money. If you choose to do this, keep in mind that the goal is not to create a good risk reward. It's to hedge away absolute disaster scenarios. So these wings should not cost you more than maybe, let's say, 5% of the premium you collect, trading something like the Delta 2s or the Delta 5s, something like that. All right, so now the second structure you can trade is a bull put spread. The reason I like this one is because you only have exposure to directional moves on one side. The benefit to trading this structure is that you are only going to lose money if the stock is going down a lot, which makes sense to me because when we're short volatility, we also implicitly think that the stock is going to trend upwards. Now, we don't want to be losing money on an upwards trend because that's exactly the situations where we expect volatility to remain low. With a bull put spread, since you're only selling options on the put side, you get exposure to this. But it's important to remember that you do have this directional view now, right? It's a combination of being short volatility and long delta. Another thing I like about this structure is that you do have a defined risk because you have the long put that's further out of the money than the one you sold. When I trade a bull put spread, I'm usually doing something like selling maybe the Delta 20 put and then buying a Delta 2 or a Delta 4 put, something like that. I'll use this in cases where I personally have a bullish outlook on the industry or sector that the ETF represents, and it's definitely a good structure to keep handy for situations like this. If you were to structure a portfolio of bull put spreads, I do think this is a reasonable way to go, so long as you're very aware of the fact that you have this directional exposure. It's an important thing to keep in mind because the structure is just the way you express yourself on the market. Now, the third structure that we're going to talk about is selling Delta 20 strangles on a weekly basis. The reason I like this one is because, in the end of the day, the short-dated stuff should have the most variance risk premium. Why? Because you have the most gamma. You have the most exposure to the short-term moves. Another reason that I like the weekly Delta 20 strangles is it reduces the need for you to manage the position. Because the strikes are so wide and the time frame is so short, a lot of the times the underlying ETF should stay between your strikes, minimizing the need to delta hedge and also saving you costs on closing out the trade because you don't need to go and close out the position at expiration. You can just let it expire a lot of the time. Reducing overhead by reducing your costs is one of the important things to do as a retail trader because, let's be honest, we're paying a lot in commissions, it's not cheap to trade options, and so anywhere we can save some costs, we need to take advantage of that. Now, if you choose to trade this Delta 20 strangle, one of the ways that we talk about at Predicting Alpha to hedge this position is to actually go out to the 90-day options and buy another Delta 20 strangle out there. So what you end up with is a trade structure where You're rolling weekly expiration strangles under the protection of a larger 90-day strangle. And then if you start to pick up a bunch of delta on the long strangle hedge that you have, you go out and you restrike it to be delta 20 once again. If you take a look here in the masterclass, you can see what I'm talking about for this delta 20 strangle structure. This is what the position basically looks like. Once you pick your ETF, on the first day, you sell a 7 DTE delta 20 strangle and you buy a 90 DTE delta 20 strangle. For the next few weeks, you're rolling the weekly under the protection of this 90-day, which you're just holding. And at the end of maybe 4 or 5 weeks, you close out the whole thing, you restrike it, and if you're trading the same ETF, you stick with it, or if you're moving your capital to a new one, you repeat the process with that one. And that's basically the 3 ways that I look at trading ETFs. I'm using one of these structures because they all give you exposure to the variance risk premium, just in slightly different ways. Now, if you're a totally new trader to the option space, I do recommend starting with that 30-day delta hedged straddle. And the reason is because it's a little bit slower moving than, let's say, the weekly strangles. And also, it requires you to be a little bit more hands-on with the position management. And in the early days, there's nothing more important than actually getting your hands dirty, managing the trade, and really seeing for yourself what it means to manage your exposures to different elements of selling options, right? You want exposure to that difference between implied and realized volatility. That's what's getting you paid, but you need to manage your delta in order to get there. And the straddle is the best way to go about it. Now, if you have any questions about these, feel free to leave a comment. I'll be happy to help you out. And if not, please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to take a free trial with PA. We'll talk soon.